Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your library at home. My name is Rebecca. I'm part of the Public Programs team at the State Library of New South Wales. I'd like to begin this morning by acknowledging that I live and work on Gadigal land, the traditional custodians of this land, on which knowledge has been exchanged for millennia. We celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal culture and language across New South Wales, and I take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present, and especially emerging. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal Australians who may be joining us online today. On the first Thursday of every month during the season of winter, the State Library has partnered with Inspiring Australia to bring to your screens an online series, The Science of Us. This program brings together scientists, researchers, authors, and academics on topics that help us to understand troubling human behaviour through the prism of science. And before introducing today's speaker, I'd like to let you know that in celebration of National Science Week, which takes place on August 14th to August 22nd, we've continued this partnership with Inspiring Australia to extend the Science of Us program throughout the month of August. Details of these extra events can be found on the State Library website and also the National Science Week website. Today, we are very pleased to be welcoming to your screens cognitive neuroscientist Dr. Mark Williams on the topic of limiting your screen time. There will be time today for a Q&A session at the conclusion of the presentation, so I encourage you all at any stage to submit your questions through the Q&A feature of your Zoom app. We'll facilitate as many of these questions as we can at the conclusion of the presentation. And before we hear from Dr. Mark Williams, I'd like to introduce to your screens now, Manager of Inspiring Australia, Jackie Randles.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us here for the Science of Us. Today's topic is a really compelling one. There is so much science behind screen time and what's it doing to our brains. And I'm delighted that again, we're joined in National Science Week by Dr. Mark Williams. He's a neuroscientist who's committed to improving learning, productivity, and well-being. And a couple of years ago, he gave some presentations in National Science Week on the topic, Are Smartphones Making Us Dumb? And he gained a lot of interest and media attention for this topic. And I must say, all of us working from home in New South Wales might be feeling very overwhelmed by the amount of screen time we're engaging in at the moment. But what are the mental and physical impacts of spending too much time on our devices, and why are they so compelling? How is it that we check emails relentlessly throughout the day, even when there aren't any there, and we feel often compelled to check a message as soon as it comes in, not to mention the hours and hours we might spend in social media, especially at the moment? Mark, I'd like to invite you to turn on your screen and join us now to give us a wonderful presentation about why we should really think about limiting our screen time and giving us some tips on how we can do this. And most importantly, how we can improve not only our own well-being, but that of our families. Over to you, and we'll open up for questions in about 35 to 40 minutes. Thanks so much, Mark, and thanks, Rebecca, for hosting us today.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you, Rebecca, as well. I'm just going to share my screen. This always takes me a minute, so I'm warning you. So today I'm going to talk about screen time and how we manage, why we need to limit our screen time to begin with, and then how we manage to limit our screen time. First, I just want to introduce myself. So I am a cognitive neuroscientist. Cognitive neuroscience is a fairly recent discipline. It's only been around for about 25 years. Basically, a cognitive neuroscientist is a neuroscientist that explores the human brain as opposed to animal models of the brain. So prior to about 25, 30 years ago, most or all neuroscientists worked on animal models or worked on modeling methods. About 25 years ago, we got these new techniques such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, magnetoencephalography, MEG, EEG as well, which enabled us to look at the human brain in wake living humans, so we could actually explore how the human brain works. And so that spawned this new discipline, cognitive neuroscientist. It's basically a mixture of psychology and neuroscience put together. And I have a double major. When I was at university, I did psychology and I did neuroscience. And I combined those two things because when I was doing university, there was no cognitive neuroscientist. Then after I finished that, which I did at Monash University, I went to MIT in the US and I worked at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research at MIT. And there I learned these new techniques, especially magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and I was looking both in humans and in some animal work as well when I was at MIT. MIT, of course, is the #1 university in the world for neuroscience, but also engineering, technology. I was right across the road from the William Gates Centre, which was a really interesting place to work. The other really interesting thing is that when I was at MIT, the first iPhone was released. So when I was working at MIT, we had the first release of the iPhone, which was only released in the US. And so I've looked on with quite interested eyes at the rise of the smartphone, because as somebody who's a neuroscientist, I am deeply embedded in technology. I can program in 5 different languages. A lot of my research now uses virtual reality technology. As I said, I did MRIs. I developed a lot of new sequences and new ways of analyzing data from MRIs to look at brain function. So I'm not in any way a technophobe. I'm really into technology. It's just the way we're now using both the smartphone, the iPads and laptops is causing some real issues for us, both in our productivity at work, but also in our learning at schools and in our health and well-being at home. And these are things that we really need to start looking at. And I'll go through a few of these over the next 30 minutes or so. There's so much information in this area now that I'm not going to cover it all, but hopefully I'll give you a good flavour of what's actually out there and what we now know about the impact of devices on our brains and our behaviour. So the rise of screens, as I said, 2007 was the first iPhone. Around the same time, of course, they released iPad as well, which meant that we had devices on us all the time, rather than prior to that. Of course, devices were something that you sat down at a table and you actually used. And that's one of the big issues that we now have, is that we now have these devices on us all the time. And that's impacting our lives in many, many different ways. Now there's 3.3 billion smartphones operating today. The App Store's revenue was $92 billion in 2018. And 72% of people say they are rarely more than 5 feet away from their handset at any time. And interestingly, 66% of smartphone users say that they're addicted to their phones, that they actually get anxious when their phones aren't close to them, which is a really scary statistic when you think that almost 100% of the people in Australia have a smartphone. We also know now that many countries, even here in Australia, I know in Melbourne and in Sydney, they're starting to put traffic lights on the pavement in major cities. And they're putting traffic lights on the pavement because of the number of accidents that are occurring because people don't look up from their smartphones when they're crossing the road. That is, we're actually dying because we won't look up from our smartphones, because these things capture our attention so well that we're unable to look up and check the road before we move onto the road, and we're dying. And the number of accidents from people walking across the road while we're checking their smartphone. I think the last one I saw was in the US just before COVID, and it was about 35 people a day who were seriously injured walking across the road while checking their smartphone. But of course, they're making our lives better, right? We now have access to this computer, which is way more powerful than any computer we had 20 years ago, in our pockets, available to us 24 hours a day. We have access to the world. We have access to our emails. We have access to thousands of friends on Facebook and on Twitter and on LinkedIn and all these different things. Our boss can email us 24 hours a day and we can respond no matter where we are. And our kids can play with people, you know, all around the world. But is it really making our lives better? In the last 10 years, we have seen a significant increase in stress in societies where smartphones being introduced, which is basically all societies now. We've seen an increase in anxiety, we've seen an increase in depression, we've seen an increase in addiction, and we've seen an increase in suicide. Now, all of these increases were occurring before COVID. So this isn't an effect of COVID. This is something that was happening before COVID. Of course, it's been exacerbated now by COVID. We've also seen a decrease in socializing, and I'm talking here about real socializing that actually impacts our brains in positive ways, because socializing on a device actually impacts our brains negatively. A decrease in physical activity, a decrease in sleep, a decrease in learning. And in societies that are adopting screens in schools, we're seeing a decrease in learning. And a lot of countries now, Japan's a good example, China's a good example, actually saw a decrease in learning, so they took out all of the devices from their schools, or regulated the number of devices that could be used in schools. Countries like ours, Australia, and the US have actually not an increase in the number of devices in their schools. And Australia is actually #1 in the world for devices in schools. You might be interested in knowing. And they've seen a significant drop in their learning in schools. And we've seen a decrease in memory capacity, in curiosity, and in tolerance in our societies. And I like to put resilience there. Resilience is a really difficult thing to actually test, but it's a combination of basically several of these factors. So therefore I put resilience there as well. So what's going on? Well, one of the problems is devices impact negatively on Hebbian learning. Now, what's Hebbian learning? This is a little bit of neuroscience. It's pretty simple. It's the idea that cells that fire together wire together. And this is how we learn. We all learn this way. So when several cells are firing simultaneously, they strengthen their connections with each other so that they'll fire next time with each other. So the idea that is the brain wires itself based on experience and learning. There's not enough information in our DNA to wire up our brain because it's way too complicated. It does it based on experience and learning via this Hebbian learning. This wiring is actually most prolific in children, but it continues throughout life. And learning requires us to focus or attend to specific aspects of a process and repeat those over and over again. And devices are really suboptimal for Hebbian learning. So what you need to do is you need to attend to one thing and do it, multiple times. When my son many years ago was learning how to play basketball, and what he did to learn how to play basketball was to begin with, when he was trying to learn how to bounce the ball, he would stand there and try and bounce the ball over and over and over and over again, just concentrating and attending to that thing, bouncing the ball. And then when he got good at that, he started trying to shoot for goal, and he'd do that over and over and over again. Putting him in a competition where there's lots of people around and there's lots of things attracting his attention wouldn't allow him to learn how to play basketball, because if you're too distracted by all these other things, what he needed to be is an environment where he could actually just focus on the one thing. Why are devices really bad for Hebbian learning? Well, we've known for a long time. This is, Times Square. I should introduce it. You probably all know this is Times Square. I used to love going to Times Square when I was working at MIT because you could get a bus down very cheaply to Times Square. Times Square is great because it's a great demonstration of marketing on steroids. These billboards are extremely expensive. And so all the marketers that do this, they're the best of the best, and they use the techniques that attract our attention, because they want to attract your attention rather than your attention being attracted to something else. What attracts our attention? 4 things are really good at attracting our attention. One is faces. And that's why billboards use faces, and they use faces all over the place. because they attract our attention and they're really good at it. Number 2 is colour. Reds and oranges and yellows are the best thing to attract our attention because that's the colour that fruit ripens to, and we only have colour vision so that we can see fruit, because we evolved and we needed to a way of seeing fruit rather than climbing trees and risking our lives. So we need to see when fruit ripened, and yellows and oranges and reds are the colour that fruit ripens to usually. And so those colours attract our attention. And so that's why they use reds and yellows and oranges. The other thing is movement attracts our attention. So all of these billboards now move. And of course, from an evolutionary point of view, that makes sense. You want to know when something's flying towards your head. And then fourthly, sound captures our attention. Again, from an evolutionary point of view, you want to know when something's creeping up behind you or if there's a big bang or whatever. And so sound captures our attention. All these billboards now make sounds so that they'll again capture our attention. And this is a really cool place to hang out, but you wouldn't want to be here for very long because you're constantly being attracted by all these different billboards and so on. Devices do exactly the same thing. Their devices use all of these techniques to actually capture your attention. So a lot of them will use oranges, and of course the most popular apps you'll find are actually the ones that are using the oranges and the yellows and the reds to capture your attention. They have icons that look a little bit like faces because, again, that captures our attention. Our brain isn't smart enough to realize that these aren't, and the G on the Google now activates our brain like it's a face, and so it captures our attention. They, of course, use movement. These things ding and move up and down, right, to actually capture our attention. And also the phone will vibrate, and that is a movement, yeah? So that actually captures your attention. And they make sounds, right? They ding or they buzz or they make different noises to capture your attention. The biggest problem with that is that every time your attention is caught by one of these dings or bings or red dots or whatever, you switch to that thing. And so you lose what you're actually doing at the time. And you lose about 90 seconds of information that you were just working on. So the stuff you were processing the 90 seconds before your phone buzzes or whatever, you lose that information because you don't have time to store it in a temporary store that can then be stored for, when you're sleeping at night in your memory store. So you lose the information. The other problem is that our attention is really important for us to know what's actually happening. So if you're not attending to something, if you're attending to something else, then you're not attending to what's important, then you don't actually see it. Now, there's been a lot of research showing that if you take your mobile phone, this has all been done, simulation. If you put your phone in the glove box, you turn it off, you put it in your glove box, so it's away from you, 10% of your attention is still on your phone. That is 10% of your attention is still on your phone if it's turned off and put in your glove box. 10% of your attention is equivalent to one standard drink. So if you have your phone turned off and in your glove box, it's equivalent to driving after having one standard drink. Now think about that. Students at many schools these days are allowed to have their mobile phones on them. If they have their phone on them and it's turned off, they're going to class after having equivalent of one standard drink. The other big problem is if it actually dings or buzzes or does any of those things, it captures your, if it's turned on, it does those things, it captures your attention, and therefore you lose about 60 to 90 seconds of your attention. That means 60 to 90 seconds of your attention, you're not actually attending to the road. You don't see anything on the road. And that's if it just buzzes. If you hear it buzz, you lose about 60 to 90 seconds of your attention. You don't see anything on the road for that period of time. And that's if you don't even look at it. Now, the big problem is, of course, in our prefrontal cortex, which is in our frontal lobes, which is about here in our brain. Sorry, this is our brain, of course, eyes down here. So we have this whole area here, which is a frontal lobe. We have an area around here, which is called the prefrontal cortex. That's part of the area that actually controls your attention. In adults, it's fully functional, but in teenagers and kids up to the age of 25, it's not fully functional. So the effects on a teenager or a child of having a phone or an iPad or anything on them is significantly worse. So it's significantly worse if you're a child or a teen. Also, these areas need to develop, and they need to develop strong attentional mechanisms. We'll talk about this a bit more later, but to do that, you've got to actually be controlling your attention. And if they're constantly being distracted by a mobile phone or an iPad or a laptop that's dinging and buzzing and doing all those things, then they're never actually training this attentional network to actually be solid enough to control their attention. So why is this capturing our attention really so bad? Well, the really, really big problem with it is that we can't multitask. Our brains actually aren't capable of multitasking. I often when presenting this stuff, I'll have someone go, oh, my wife's really good at multitasking, or my husband, or whatever. You can't. Our brains are not capable of multitasking. What our brains do is task switch. So you actually switch from one task to another, and you can do that reasonably quickly. The problem is that each time you switch, and that switch occurs because of your attention. So your task switch is basically your attention taking you from one task to another and then back again. But each time you task switch, each time your attention goes from one task to another, again, you lose about 90 seconds of what you just did. So the last 90 seconds of what you were thinking about is lost. And it takes you about 60 seconds to think about what you're actually now doing. So you lose over a minute every time you do that. Now think about how many times you switch from your email to your Word document, to your phone, to your Facebook page, to your whatever, every day. How many hours are you losing because you're switching from one thing to another, to another, to another? Quite a bit. The other big problem is that every time you switch, it's effortful. So every time you switch, you've got to activate your prefrontal cortex, which is your attentional network, and actually make that shift actually happen. And then you've got to work out what you're actually doing now, catch up on that, bring it in from your long-term memory and so on. So that's effortful, it's therefore draining, and it's limited. So during the day, you only have a certain amount of attention available to you until you have to try and reset that attentional network. And every time you do it, you're using up some of that, which is why when we are, doing this multitasking, this task switching, and we've got multiple things open at once, by the end of the day, we are absolutely drained. We are exhausted and we can't do anything, and then we're snapping at our kids, or we're snapping at our partners, because it's draining, and it's draining on our brains, and it's not productive. And it's actually affecting our intelligence. So as Jackie said, I presented a couple of years ago on the fact that smartphones are making us dumb, which they actually are. And I'll give you one demonstration of that. And there's many, many, many demonstrations of this now, but this is one that was published in 2017, which stimulated me to actually do that talk. Basically what they've done here is they've just taken a large group of teenagers, and they've either had their phone on their desk. Now their phones were turned off, so their phones couldn't beep or buzz or do any of those things, and it was turned upside down, so they couldn't actually see the screen, and it wasn't buzzing or it wasn't doing any of those things. It was just sitting there. It was turned off. And it was either on their desk, or it was in their pocket or their bag, or it was in a different room. So this is basically if they didn't have a smartphone on them, right? And what they showed was that there's a significant drop in their working memory capacity. This is basically your ability to think even innovatively, and to make calculations, and to do things that are a little bit difficult. They had a significant drop, both when it was in their desk or it was in their pocket or their bag. Again, it was turned off, right? And also this is a measure of their intelligence, and their intelligence significantly dropped when it was on their desk, when their phone was on their desk compared to when it was in another room. So just having your phone there, because you're attending to your phone, 10% of your attention's on your phone, and because you can't focus 100% on what you're doing, you get a significant drop in your memory capacity and you get a significant drop in your intelligence level. So if you're trying to be productive, if you're trying to think about something, if you're trying to do some work, having your phone near you is impacting that. We also know that there's significant brain changes. This is some lovely neuroimaging studies that have been done. This was done back in 2019, and published in a very good journal. There's been several follow-up studies from this, and this has been replicated multiple times. But basically, the more time a child spends on a device, the less white tracks they have in their brain. So the white tracks are the tracks, are connections between different cortical areas. So your brain has got lots of different compartments, if you like different suburbs in a city, and it's connected by lots of freeways. And that you need those freeways to be working really well to actually think about anything, right? Because some areas have got information about how things look, other things, what color they are, other areas are words, other areas are your friends, other areas how to do calculations, other things are, other areas are what numbers look like, and so on. You need them all to be connected really well. The more time you spend on a device as a child, the less of those freeways that connect those areas are available to you. And this is shown twice here. These are the white tracks, the connections across the brain, and it's showing that there's a significant decrease in those the more time you spend on a screen during childhood. The more time you spend on a screen during childhood, also, you get an increased likelihood of being diagnosed with ADD. And kids who learn to read on screens have poorer reading ability than kids who learn on paper. Now, another thing we've known about our brains for a long time now is you use it or you lose it. And you probably heard this before. But this is basically the idea that the areas that you're using, they become stronger, just like a muscle, if you like. And the areas that you're not using, they slowly atrophy, because our brains, although extremely complex, we're basically using all of our brains all of the time. And if we're not using part of it, then it basically decreases, so you can use it for other things. Other things will take over if you're not doing the things that you normally would do, or if there's something else that you need to do rather than that thing. And we've known this for a long time. And the problem is that devices limit our experience and our learning. So we don't have to navigate or remember or calculate or consider or imagine or interact with the world and others anymore. And if we don't use these abilities, we will actually lose them. And I'll give you one example. One of the famous studies in this area is called the London taxi drivers study. And they basically looked at the brains of London taxi drivers who have to do this really, really difficult test before they can get a license to be a London taxi driver, where they have to know all of the roads and how to get everywhere in London without a map or anything like that. And they showed that there's an area, hippocampus, posterior hippocampus is much larger in London taxi drivers than it is in normal people. What they've also shown more recently, several studies, is that that area is actually much smaller, it's atrophied in people who use Wayfinder apps. So Wayfinder apps are your Google Maps and so on, the different types of Wayfinder apps, right? But if you're always using a map on your phone to get around and it's telling you where to go, then that area of your brain that you would normally use to get around is atrophying. It's decreasing. A big problem with that is that that area is connected to your episodic memory area. And your episodic memory area is all the stuff that you did during the day and all the stuff you've done during your life, who you are as a person. And there's been studies showing that if you use a Wayfinder app, not only are those areas of your brain involved in finding your way there, but also you don't remember what you actually did when you got there. So those two things are linked, and if you don't have one, you don't have the other. So what do we do on devices? So we do social networking, yeah? So one of the big things that most people do is social networking. Big problem with social networking is that it's not actually social. To be social, what you need to do is you need to get face-to-face with someone. And when you're face-to-face with someone, you get a whole bunch of really positive neurotransmitters that are released. Having a conversation, a face-to-face conversation with somebody activates more of the brain than any other task we do. It's better for your brain than any other thing that we actually do. And having a face-to-face conversation with someone is actually better for your mental health than any medication that we have available. On social networking, you don't get any of those good, happy neurotransmitters released. And so you're not really socializing. What you're doing is possibly seeing other people being social or organizing to be social, but it's not about being social in itself. But unfortunately, a lot of people use it that way. And gaming. So gaming is a big issue because it's addictive, which we'll talk about in a second, but also gaming means that children aren't actually going out and playing anymore. And we know there's been a significant decrease in playtime, real playtime, in both children and teenagers, and a significant decrease in their bone density. So children and teenagers have a significant decrease in their bone density compared to when I was a child. And that's directly related to how much time they're spending outside doing real playing, real games, as opposed to gaming on a device. Of course, we watch TV and we do all those things, but again, we're missing out on a lot of things when we do that because we're not going to the movies anymore. We're not going out with people and spending time with people. I was just talking to Jackie and Rebecca about the fact that teenagers don't sit with their parents for a family movie anymore because they'll watch it on their iPad or they'll watch it on their phone rather than watching it with the family. And so we're missing out on all that really good, important socialization that occurs when we either go to the movies or when we have family night, family movie night together or whatever. And then there's shopping, and we've seen, of course, an increase in internet shopping, which is causing big problems for lots of people because they're overspending when they're internet shopping. But again, you don't get the socialization of actually going to talk to someone, going to spend time with people, going to actually look at someone and get all those happy neurotransmitters, which are so good for our brain and so good for our mental health. And then lastly, there's pornography. And there's been lots and lots of research showing that males, especially teenage males who watch pornography regularly, are more likely to be misogynistic, are more likely to have, I know this is general audience, so I won't be inappropriate. There are lots of issues around especially boys, teenage boys and men, and pornography and the way they treat women. And it's become a big issue, and there's a lot of really large studies being done on this, and it's something that we need to look at. So why are all these things such a big issue? Well, the problem is that they are addictive and they're designed to be addictive. So how does this work? Well, when something's positive happens in our brain releases dopamine and we feel pleasure. It's our brain's mechanism to get us to repeat positive things. So eating, drinking, and sex are things that release dopamine, so that we remember that thing, and we then want to do it again. So therefore, that's really good from an evolutionary point of view, of course. And we remember the thing that just happened, before the release of dopamine, because dopamine also attaches to areas in your memory centers. So you remember things better when you actually have a pleasant response to them or when you like them, and then you're more likely to do them again later. Now, casinos and so on have spent many, many years perfecting this so that you get the optimal amount of dopamine released when you have a win so that you will get addicted more quickly. And the way they do this is using a thing called variable reinforcement, where you vary when you get the reward so that you really, really want the reward, but it hasn't gone too long that you're over it and you couldn't be bothered waiting any longer. So there's an optimal point, and that varies from trial to trial. And casinos and so on have optimized when that point is. Tech companies use these variable reinforcement schedules in order to reward and prolong play. So they use exciting, stimulating sound and lighter effects, and they use a buzzing and all those things to increase the reward that you get. And they have the likes and all these things as well. And this increases dopamine and likelihood of return. Casinos and gambling machines and so on, the operators, use this term likelihood of return, which is how likely you are to either stay on the thing and keep spending your money, or how likely you are to come back. Tech companies use exactly the same term, and they're talking about exactly the same thing, getting you back. Edutech companies call it gamifying. It is using variable reinforcement schedules to prolong use and likelihood of return. And we know that now. Gaming is now in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's the manual used by psychiatrists and psychologists to diagnose different disorders. It's now, gaming addiction is now in the DSM-5 as a clinical addiction, and it is alongside and treated the same as drug addiction, alcohol addiction, gambling addiction. And the big problem, I think, is that we know that gaming addiction is a gateway drug to gaming addiction is a gateway drug to gambling addiction. Gambling addiction is a gateway drug to alcohol and drug addiction. The gaming platforms make most of their money out of advertising. Most of the advertising money they make, most of the share comes from gaming, online gaming advertising. And you can now bet on Fortnite competitions. You can bet on, all of the games that the kids and teens play. You can bet on them on those gaming apps. Sorry, on those gambling apps, which, these industries are actually feeding off each other. We also know 90% of teenagers in the US have phantom buzz syndrome. This is an illusion. So their leg feels as though they're feeling a buzz on their leg, where their phone normally is in their pocket, even when their phone's not buzzing. A good colleague of mine took his students out to the Arizona desert. After 5 days, 25% of them were still feeling buzzes on their legs, even though they'd had no reception on their phones for 5 days. So this is a physical addiction to their phones. And we're wiring ourselves up to be depressed. So Twenge published this work in 2018, showing this was with over 500,000 teenagers they surveyed, and they showed we've got a significant increase in depression in teenage girls, which corresponds with the increase in devices and device use by teenagers. Significant increase. Jackie actually just sent me a link to a paper that's just come out where they've actually shown this again. They've shown it with loneliness in teenagers. So they've shown it for both boys and girls, and significant increase in loneliness since 2010. But this is really, really sad. And of course, this is before COVID. We also know the longer you spend on a device, the more likely you are to have suicidal tendencies as well in teenagers. So 27% of Year 8 students who frequently use social media show signs of depression. Amongst the normal population, it's about 12% of Year 8 students should show signs of depression. And people with more friends on social media have higher risks of depression and less friends in real life. So let's be honest, multinational tech companies are about making money. Their board of directors and shareholders want profits. Technologies are designed to be attractive so that it sells. The more attractive equals more sales. If you feel like you can't do without it, then even better. They are not in the business of making your life better or educating your kids. So we need a serious rethink. And look, there's nothing wrong with the technology. I use smartphone. I have a laptop. I have iPad. I'm a huge fan of the technology. I think it's an awesome technology. But just like the motor car, when first motor car came out, there was no such thing as road rules. There was no such thing as licenses. There was no such thing as seatbelts and so on. It wasn't until we had the motor car for a while that we realized that we needed to stop and think about how we were using the motor car, because there were lots of accidents. And today, the number of people who die in percentage to the number of motor cars and the number of people driving is much lower than when motor cars first came out, because we started realizing that we had to use this technology slightly differently to actually get the best benefits out of it. So here's 5 ways to take back control, 5 ways that we can actually use this technology better. One is use pen and paper. So in the morning when I get up, I look at my Google Calendar and I write down all the things I've got to do today, and then I turn it off so that I don't have to look at it again. And so that I can actually do stuff in the real world without having, a device on me all the time, so that I can actually think better and I have more intelligence, because as I showed you before, by having this mobile phone on you or a laptop or any other device, any other screen, you're decreasing your intelligence and you're decreasing your working memory. So you're not actually working as best as you could. Also, we know that you remember more if you write with a pen than if you type. So there's great research showing that if you write with a pen, you remember the information better than if you actually type the information. And kids who learn how to write with a pen rather than learn how to type actually read better, have better vocabulary and better reading skills. And I also, whenever I can, I'll turn off all my devices and use pen and paper to actually do things and write ideas. And I have notebooks all over the place, which I use constantly when I'm doing those things. And I really encourage my kids to do the same. So now we're in lockdown, I get my kids to print out what they've got to do that day and all the information they've got to do that day, and then turn off their devices and do it in pen and paper. Then take a photo of it with my phone and upload it to their teachers. Right? So they're not on their devices for 90% of the day. They're on their devices for a short period at the beginning. They usually then go on just after lunchtime to check if there's anything from their teachers and so on. And then at the end of the day, before they finish, they upload everything to their teachers so that the teacher can then check it for the next day. Set up a monitoring app. So set up a monitoring app on there's lots of free ones now available, some really cool ones on your devices, on all of your devices, all your family and everybody, and just monitor what you're doing. It's really surprising when you do this. People I work with are constantly saying to me, wow, I had no idea I spent that much time on Facebook, or wow, I had no idea I spent that much time just, on the internet doing nothing. Set it up. Being aware of what you're doing is going to impact on your behavior. It's the number one thing for impacting behavior. So set up a monitoring app and see what everybody's doing. Turn off all your notifications. You don't need some tech guru screaming at you all the time. Whenever I get a new phone, first thing I do is go in and try and work out how to turn off all the notifications. It's often quite difficult because they don't want you to, but you can. So turn off all your notifications. Turn off all your notifications on your computer as well. I do what's called the Pomodoro technique. It's something that I teach to teachers and to execs and to everybody I work with, and to parents as well. So Pomodoro technique has been shown to be extremely good for productivity and increasing your attentional ability, capacity. Basically what you do is you do one thing only for 25 minutes and you time it. You have a timer. I always have a timer with me for 25 minutes. During that 25 minutes, you only focus on one task only. After 25 minutes, you have 5 minutes off where you can get up and move around and do all those sorts of things. You do that 4 times, so that's 2 hours, and then you have a longer break where you can do other things. What I do is I have all my emails and everything turned off during that 2-hour time that I'm concentrating, and then I check my emails and all those things during that 25 minutes off. And then I turn off my emails and everything and go back to my Pomodoro again. You can look it up, Pomodoro, or you can email me and we can talk about it. But yeah, it's a great way to actually be more productive. The second last one is restrict access. So have periods of time when you're not on your devices. If you have kids, have periods of time when your whole family's not on your devices, when you're doing fun stuff, getting mud, getting dirty, going to the beach, whatever it is that you love doing, do something during that period. But have periods of time where you have no access. None of you have access to a screen. You all have to do something different. And the fifth one is make it difficult and make it easy. What do I mean by this? Well, number one way to change any habit is to make the habit that you want to get rid of difficult and make the thing that you want to do easy. So I was working with a guy a while ago, and he had a real problem with getting home from work every day, and he'd turn on the TV and there was problems in the family and so on because of it, because he'd just sit there in front of the TV for hours at night and he wasn't interacting and all of these sorts of things. So what we worked out was he would put his remote in a drawer, he'd take out the batteries and put that in another drawer. And so when he wanted to turn on the TV, he had to go and find his remote, and then he had to go and find the batteries, and then he had to put the batteries in before he could turn on the TV. It stopped him from actually turning on the TV just automatically when he got home and doing it. So if you make the things that you want to get rid of, the habits that you don't like, or the habits that are difficult, then you're less likely to do them because you've got to think about it before you do it. And then you make the habits that you want to do easy. So I have my guitar next to my chair, next to the dining room table, my acoustic guitar, because I want to play it regularly. So in the morning when I get up and we're chatting to the kids over breakfast or whatever, I always pick up my guitar and play my guitar. And it makes it easy, yeah, because it's right there. If it was put away somewhere, I wouldn't do it. But because it's right there, right next to me, I pick it up and play it. So make it easy or make it difficult, depending on whether or not you want to do it or you don't want to do it. And that is it for me. Sorry, I went a little bit over time, so we've got a little less time for questions, but that's my email address if you want to email me, or my website if you want to check out some of the stuff on my website. Thank you all. And thank you again to Jackie and to Rebecca for inviting me along.
Hi, Mark. What a fantastic presentation. So many great ideas there. And I particularly love the idea of having the guitar at the ready. Great idea. And also putting the phones away, not just you, but the whole family. We do have a number of questions that I'd like to throw to you. And if any of our audience members would like to pose a question, just use the Q&A function there in the chat. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So Mark, I just wanted to touch on something I struggle with, and it's being compelled to check my email all the time. And it's kind of nutty, and it's an automatic thing that I do. Even when I'm in the middle of writing, I'll constantly check my email, and I don't know why I do it. Can you please tell me what the science is and how I can stop this behavior?
Yeah, so again, that's a habit that you've got into. So habits are really hard. And I think you've got someone talking about habits and how to stop habits in a few weeks' time. So again, you've got the dopamine release. So when you check your email, you probably get, occasionally you get an email that you like, you get good responses and so on. So that releases a dopamine, which makes you want to do it again. So therefore you get, you get into this cycle, which addictions and habits are really, addiction is just a more severe version of a habit. And so you've got into this habit. So you need to somehow break that habit. The way I do it because, yeah, I do have that problem at the moment. At the moment, I'm trying to write a book with a colleague. So what I do is the Pomodoro technique, as I said. So I do this 25 minutes where all I can do is write and I do nothing else during that period. And then during my 5-minute break, I can quickly check my email if I really need to, or I wait until 2 hours and then do it during my 25-minute break. But turning off the notifications, having the little numbers beep up is how they're getting you addicted to it, or having the little thing jump, or having it, you've got an email or whatever. That stuff is all attracting your attention. And therefore, if you've already got that habit, then when you get attracted by those things, that's going to draw your attention to it and you're going to do it automatically. And so much of our brains are actually done automatically that, you know, breaking those habits is difficult. But turn off your emails, and you choose when you want to actually check these things. And that's what I do. That's why I have all the notifications off. I don't have any little numbers popping up. And I choose when I'm going to do all those things. So I would try and do the same. It'll take a while and you will make mistakes. You will constantly have to check yourself. But yeah, making it difficult is the best way to do it.
I think for a lot of us working at home during lockdown, you tend to be on 24/7. Yeah, I find myself replying to emails late at night that really are not urgent. You know, I can very well do them the next day. So it's about being more mindful about what I'm choosing to do with my time.
And it's interesting in Germany because they've realised that there's such a big issue and productivity was dropping. They've now made it illegal for companies to email their staff after work hours. So that they all have to turn off the emails after work hours and then all have to email each other. And they can get fined by the government. Now, I'm not saying we need to start fining people, but, you know, that's an interesting aspect to it. And that they've noticed such a drop in productivity that they've actually made it illegal. And I think Victorian Police Force are trying to bring in a similar requirement as well.
Interesting. A question's come in around, a few actually, around the online kind of interaction compared with face-to-face. Now, as we're in lockdown, we know that digital devices can make us feel more lonely, but is there any benefit at all if you're on a video conference call? Do you get any benefit from that when you can't see each other face-to-face?
It's better than no contact at all, absolutely. It's nowhere near as good as the actual thing. I like to compare it because I'm a surfer, so I like to compare it to watching a video of surfing versus going surfing yourself. You know, there is no comparison to the two things. It is better, especially in these environments, to at least have some contact with people, especially if you live alone. But we don't get all the neurotransmitters released when we're doing it. Also, you get smells, you get pheromones that also activate lots of brain areas when you're actually face-to-face that you don't get over the screen. The other big problem is that when you're on a screen, you don't have the eye contact that you would normally have. So because we're all looking at the same thing and we're all looking back at each other, you can't read each other's whose turn it is and all those sorts of things, which causes a big problem for our brains, because our brains automatically, without our awareness, codes information based on where people are looking and how interested they are in you and so on. And so if they're not looking at you, you don't think they're interested in you, and you have a negative response to that. So it's a difficult one because we have no choice at the moment, but it really does impact us negatively in many, many different ways. I could go on I have a whole chapter written about it in my book, but yeah, we'll
look forward to that coming out. There's a couple of questions from educators who are with us today. We have a school principal who's wanting to know how to communicate a message that doesn't scare parents in lockdown, and another educator who'd like to help leadership, teachers and parents to understand that learning would be much better if phones weren't accessed by students during the day, in recess breaks and so on. So could you perhaps address those questions together?
Yeah, it's difficult at the moment. I do presentations a lot for schools, working with teachers and working with counsellors, working with the parents as well. And there's so many different aspects to it that makes it even more difficult. But, you know, my message to them would be that it is more stressful when you're on a screen. So getting the kids out, getting the kids to do those sorts of things, setting them up. The school my kids are at, they're a little bit more flexible, but they still like to have the kids come in on Zoom all the time, whereas I'm just saying to the teachers, look, you know, giving them reasons why and so on not to. But if they could actually set it up that way, say to the teachers, you know, when you set up the programs and stuff with the kids, make it so that they do have lots of periods where they're not on devices, and set that as part of the work that they're actually doing. So, you know, explain that you want them to go on in the morning and print stuff out or write notes and then turn everything off and then upload things at the end of the day so that the teacher can check them and so on. Using techniques like that, I think, help. But yeah, I think schools, which is why I love working with schools, and I do a lot of work with schools. Schools have a real role to play in educating parents, I think, and in actually driving this message forwards, that kids need to get out and play. Kids need to actually learn how to write with a pen. Kids need to get off the devices and learn how to socialise, because those are the things that we're going to need in the future for their jobs, not how to code. Yeah.
Another question's come in around why isn't the Department of Education taking the lead and having children, you know, officially kind of putting their phones away at the beginning of the day?
Yeah, great question. I was working for a short period of time with Rob Stokes here in New South Wales when he was Minister for Education. And then he was trying to introduce banning all phones from high schools and primary schools. And then they came up to an election and that was put on the back burner, and then he was moved to another portfolio, and the new education minister isn't really interested in chatting at the moment. Hopefully she will be at some stage.
So we'll just keep the pressure up and keep
the pressure up. I work with Department of Health, working with school psychologists and counsellors in trying to get the message out there. I'm working hard. It's hard to get through sometimes.
A couple of questions about ebooks. Do ebooks impact your ability to read and take in information? What's your view?
Yes, you remember less. If you read on a device, if you read on a screen, you remember less of the information than you do if you read on a book. And there's 4 very good reasons. I won't go through all the reasons for it, but yeah, there's lots of really good research. It's been done the research has been going on for about 50 years since we had, you know, computers. And yes, it does. You're significantly worth it remembering the information if you read it on a screen than if you read it in a piece of paper.
Well, look, our final question really is from someone who'd like to know how to communicate with friends and family that I'd like to be less available, when there's this expectation that she will respond to texts and phone calls straight away. She doesn't want to do that anymore. How can she communicate that without offending?
I'm just honest with people. I just explain that, hey, this is stressing me, and I need to have time off the devices. You know, I love you, but we don't need to be in contact 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's, you know, and if you send me the message, I will get it at some stage and I will respond to it. But it's no. And if you actually need me urgently, then call me, because talking on the phone's not an issue, right?
That's great advice.
We could actually use the phones the way we were supposed to use the phones, which is to talk on them, because that's a great way to actually communicate with someone. And they can also get the prosody and stuff of your voice, so they can understand whether or not you're feeling good or bad. And you have less issues with communication if you're actually talking to someone than if you're actually texting them or writing to them.
Well, look, Mark, we're at time now, and lots of people have asked whether they can access your presentation and whether there are links to the peer-reviewed papers you referred to. What I would suggest is you visit Mark's website. Would you like to just tell us your website address?
Yes, quite easy, drmarkwilliams.com. If you go there, there's a whole bunch of different things on there.
That's right. And this webinar is being recorded by the State Library of New South Wales, and it will be published in due course along with the transcript. So people will be able to access this. And Mark, just fabulous information, lots of great tips there. And I think it's a conversation we just have to keep having, don't we? And being much more mindful about how we interact with our devices and how we model behaviour to our children.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Jackie. They're great technology. It just needs to be used better.
Yeah, thank you. So Rebecca, we'll throw back to you. Thank you so much for hosting us. And
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mark Williams and Jackie. It was a fascinating conversation. I've taken a number of notes myself. Thank you all at home for taking the time to log on. As I mentioned, we do have 2 more talks in this series coming up in August, both topics which are very pertinent to today's situations as well. So please join us online on the 17th of August for our next In the Science of Us series for a panel discussion on End Loneliness Together, followed by, as Mark mentioned, a talk on the 19th of August regarding addiction. So both talks are online. I encourage you all also to have a look at National Science Week website. There's so much happening around Australia. It's a great initiative for children and for adults alike. So I encourage you all to take a look. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jackie. Especially to everyone who may be joining us from New South Wales, please stay safe and well. And please keep an eye on the State Library website, where our teams across the library are working really hard to provide a platform of blogs and posts in a way to connect you with some resources. And we hope to see you all again for our next in the series. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, everyone.